Hello, this is Claudrine Arnell. Today we are interviewing the phenomenal LEYDA Hernandez. Welcome, LEYDA. Welcome to Paris. So happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a bit about yourself and your journey. Yeah.
So my journey kind of led me through several different phases, I suppose. So when I first started in university, I really wanted to be an artist, and so my first bachelor's degree is actually in that. I went into marketing as a way for me to be able to still stay creative, but within the business world.
Right.
And by the time I graduated, we were really kind of in this explosion of social media and content marketing. And so I developed a lot of tech-related skills, learned to code, all of that. And that kind of led me into the analytics side of things. Ultimately, I really wanted to go back to that creative route.
Right.
And I also wanted to kind of branch out on my own. So after spending a good portion of my career kind of working as an executive at other tech companies, I saw that there was a huge hole in terms of bringing those same skills to other spaces.
Right.
And so that led me to create several companies at this point. But really it all came down to me really focusing on what are the things that I really enjoy and what are the things that I know way too much about that I didn't currently get paid for. So thinking about things more as a passion project and turning those passions into companies.
Wonderful. So what brings you to the City of Lights? We know Paris is called a City of Lights due to the Enlightenment age, the search for wisdom. People love reading here. It's all about being more enlightened. So what brings you here?
Well, I feel like Paris and New York are sister cities.
Right.
You have the City of Lights and you have the city that never sleeps.
Right.
So I really think of them kind of as sister cities in a way.
I like that.
There is a lot of overlap in terms of the businesses that are done in both of those cities. And I really wanted a chance to explore more. And so I came to Paris last year. I absolutely loved it. I wanted to spend more time here.
Nice.
And so I'm spending my summer in
Awesome. So hope you're having a great time. Could we get a little bit into your whole serial entrepreneurship? What pushed you to create 3 companies, almost all under the age of 30?
Yeah.
Hello, tell us a bit about that.
So I started with Cedulux, and the reason why I started with that one is because I was coming from an analytics kind of tech company, but I also teach, like you said, I teach at several universities.
Right.
And so at some of these universities and attending things like New York Fashion Week, kind of being in the fashion space and in the space of luxury brands, I started to realize that a lot of what we took for granted in tech, in terms of making data-driven decisions, in terms of thinking of things more systematically and scalable, building things to scale. A lot of that was missing in the fashion and the design and luxury space. And so things that we really took for granted were almost non-existent in those other spaces. And so even when it came to trend forecasting, I remember I was meeting with a company that was in that same space, and I'm asking them, how did they develop their reports? How did they get their data? And they almost had no answers for any of those questions, which to me was absolutely shocking. In the tech space, you would never recommend a decision. You would never recommend a solution without having data to back it up. Yeah, to back up the solution that you're presenting to somebody.
Absolutely.
And so the fact that there were so many companies in that space that were really making day-to-day decisions, but also macro decisions on a huge lack of data was just shocking to me. So Cedulux was really the first one in terms of bringing more data-driven decision-making, thinking of the luxury space more as a global space. And I think there's been so much change in the luxury space in the last few years. You have a whole new generation of consumers. You have the Chinese market that's really coming up into fruition. And so you've had a big change in terms of who the customers are. From a generational standpoint, from a cultural standpoint.
Value standpoint.
Yeah, and what do they consider luxury? I think Balenciaga might be the best example for that when they came out with that that dad sneaker.
Yeah.
When they came out with the dad sneaker.
That was major. Yeah,
a decade ago, you would have never thought about sneakers
being
in the
associated
luxury space. Yeah, you would have never thought about sneakers being in the luxury
Absolutely.
space. So I think that's such a good example of how much luxury has really changed, and it needs to change with its consumer. So Said Deluxe really kind of focused on bringing that, just like a more global macro view of the world to these brands, and helping them make more data-driven decisions based on that.
Thank you for sharing. Can we segue into the fact that you have been in the tech world?
Yeah.
And you have so many accolades because of that journey. Can you tell us about operating in a male-dominated space as a woman? How do you evolve career-wise?
I think there's a lot of challenges that come with that, but there's also, I think, a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't think any woman should see it as a negative when they are the only woman in the room.
Right.
I think that is actually a positive, even though it might not feel that way. I think it is actually a positive because that means that at least one of us showed up. At least one of us is there now to kind of influence the decisions that are made in a lot of conversations that happen behind closed doors. And so I've always expected to be the only woman in the room, or the only person of color in the room, or the youngest person in the room. And so for me, that didn't deter my journey, but it definitely gave me more fuel to the fire. So that if I was able to open this door, then I can open this door for so many others.
People,
but I mean, it doesn't come without its challenges. I think when you are the only type of person in any scenario, I think you have to deal with a lot of implicit bias that is projected onto you. And for a lot of these men, their career did not consist of working with other females. And so it's often not something that they're really used to. And so I would say it definitely was challenging. And I think it definitely is still challenging. And I think we should expect that. But I don't think that should deter anybody from pursuing what they want to pursue. Just know that you might have to stand up for yourself a lot more. You might have to check people on the biases that they're projecting onto you. And I think it's important to continuously do that. I think that is going to be part of, even though
changing the narrative.
It's part of changing the narrative.
Absolutely.
And even though you're there to do a job, I think you are also charged, fortunately or unfortunately, with a much larger scenario. So you are going to have to deal with these challenges, and you are going to have to learn to face them.
Face those, yes, and don't run from them. Absolutely. And so we want to talk a bit about, I went to a amazing day of awareness held at the UNESCO, and Africa still presents some of the challenges that I would say maybe other continents have been able to evolve in a more efficient way. And so speaking on the continent itself, we know that it has always had a patriarchal culture, which has ingrained certain gender based roles. And so how do you think, it influences the job market in such an implicit and explicit way? How would you speak to a young African girl about taking on, a field like tech that is male dominated? What would you say to her?
I get really excited about what's going on in Africa and all the possibilities for it.
Great.
I think there is so much potential in growth. And there's a lot of that is going to be female backed. And I think thinking about any of these continents from a global scale, from a macro scale, there's so much to offer in every single space. And I actually think that Africa is in a very well positioned for exponential growth in the tech field. And I'll explain. So you have, I think maybe this was even 7 years ago, something like that. That was the first time that you had mobile traffic. So traffic from mobile phones, from smartphones. That was the first time that you had mobile traffic surpass desktop traffic from PC computers.
Right.
And Africa is in a very good position because they already operate as a mobile first continent.
Right.
They skipped an entire stage of kind of technological development and infrastructure development, which maybe for the past few decades has been a disadvantage.
Right.
But I think when you're looking forward into the fourth industrial revolution. Which is kind of, we're just on the cusp of that. So we're talking artificial intelligence, virtual reality, machine learning, augmented reality, chatbots, all of these things becoming more mainstay.
Right.
I think when you're thinking about what the world is going to be,
towards,
Africa is in a very good position to be the continent that captures that.
Right.
They are already a mobile first country. They've been a mobile first country to begin with. You can skip a lot of the infrastructure that you've had to build in these other countries. You don't have to build telephone lines because there's Wi-Fi's and hotspots now. You don't necessarily need to build banks because there's Venmo, and they actually do all their mobile banking. They do all their mobile banking through their phones. And you can learn absolutely anything today.
The cryptocurrency,
on YouTube. And so I think if you are a woman and you're in this space, I think, and you're interested in getting into this space, I think the fact that you're mobile first already gives you an advantage.
Yes.
I think the fact that education is always going to be the answer in terms of breaking through different kinds of gender-based roles.
Right.
Especially, putting together the education and the skills that allows you to transcend that. You can learn so much of that on YouTube. You can learn everything about Excel. You can learn coding on YouTube. You can learn chemistry, physics on YouTube.
It's a YouTube university.
It's a YouTube university. So even if you don't have access to these traditional means of education, you can still get an education, which I think is the most important thing.
We definitely live in the age of information, and I really want to segue into maybe the fact that universities nowadays, they're a platform for so much change. They can really impact where we're going in terms of gender equality. Do you think they carry a responsibility in forming the next generation of women leaders? Should there be like a promotion of that culture of female leadership in universities?
I think that whenever you are responsible for educating the masses, you have a responsibility. I think you have a responsibility to deliver on that promise.
Yes.
And so I think that universities and colleges will always carry a huge responsibility for that. I think they will always have a place.
Right.
I don't think that the internet is going to completely kind of eliminate educational institutions. But you do have, I think, two unique situations in universities right now. I would say one is that, at least in the United States, you have more women that are attending college than you have men. Yes. And so already from the student demographic, we've kind of changed the we've kind of changed the name of the game there.
Yes.
In terms of who the student base is, but also in terms of not just in terms of the student base, but in terms of the next generation of professionals that end up being qualified for these positions end up being sometimes more women than men. And so I do think from a student narrative, it's kind of already there. But I would say there's this other kind of scenario that you do have to recognize, is that there is a huge generational difference between a lot of the university professors and their students. And so that relatability and that implicit bias that might come from several generations back in terms of what women should be doing or the extent of what their goals should be, I think can unconsciously be passed from the professors to the students without necessarily, thinking of it in a conscious way. And so I do think that that's important to be aware of and to recognize, because that's just the name of the game. There's always going to be several generations in the workforce. Millennials right now are the largest generation in the workforce. But the same as the universities, who's in these leadership roles tends to be other generations, which are sometimes the gender roles that we might have today are very different from the ones that they
might be generationally based.
They're familiar with.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, looking into the statistic nowadays, women's education has evolved expeditiously. Actually, we have women today being educated the number of women nowadays who are educated is to the level that we've never seen in the world. You know, it's a global phenomenon. Women are getting more degrees, but how can this translate into women entering into executive levels? How do we turn those degrees into real leadership positions? Getting to those bodies that really make the decisions, bodies of influence in the economic, political, business fields. How do we translate that?
I think there's a big emphasis right now on getting more women in tech.
Okay.
And I think that that's absolutely amazing. But what I always say is I don't necessarily need more female coders. What I need is more women in the boardroom.
Right.
I can't be the only one. And so I love the fact that, I love the fact that I can look out at these companies and the makeup of who's doing these jobs has definitely changed.
Right.
In terms of the talent pool. But I would say when you get to those leadership roles or executive roles, it's still very much this disparity between men and women, which seems almost crazy when you think about how much economic power women have, and then they're not represented in these, at the highest forms of these companies when these decisions are made that will ultimately influence them. And I mean, we see it in government right now also. But I think that there's a lot of internal work maybe that needs to happen. And it really comes down to it really comes down to the fact that you have to know your worth and your value as a woman, as a female professional. And you have to know your value.
You do.
You can't work extremely hard and do all of these things and wait for somebody to recognize your efforts.
And validate. Yeah.
Exactly. You can't wait for the promotion to come. You can't wait for that raise to come. You have to be the person that spearheads your career. Nobody else is in charge of guiding your career other than you. And so I think women have the tendency to sometimes to kind of undervalue themselves or maybe underestimate themselves, or even thinking that it will look very bad or rude or there's all kinds of negative connotations.
Stereotypes. We don't want to get into that.
You don't want to seem pushy. I think there's a lot of that kind of narrative that deters women from taking action. And so I think we really have to kind of switch gears.
Absolutely.
It's not about waiting for the opportunity to come to you. It's for you to go and find and meet the opportunity head on. And I think you have to ask for that raise. You have to ask for that promotion. And if your value's not being respected at the organization that you're at, then you need to find somewhere else where it is.
These are super insightful tips. Can you dig a bit deeper and maybe share some negotiating tips with us?
Yes. I think the ability to negotiate is extremely important. You have so many women that just take the first offer that's handed to them. I would say never take the first offer. Never take the first offer. I think you should always think about not just your salary, but your entire compensation package. So that's going to include vacation days, that's going to include sick days, what your health insurance looks like, maybe stock and equity that comes with it, commissions. Like there's a whole set of things that you can negotiate on. And maybe you do want a little bit more in terms of your salary, but maybe it's also important to you that you want to have an extra week of vacation, or that you want to be able to work from home some days. And that's something you can negotiate on, and you should negotiate on if that's important to you. And one trick that I always say to people is when you're negotiating to always throw in a milkshake.
I like that.
So when you're ordering at a restaurant, you're kind of like, okay, I want this appetizer, this entree, and then you're just like, I'll get a milkshake too.
Add that on,
something in there that you didn't really need. And I would say when you're negotiating, always add in a milkshake. And so it gives the person that you're negotiating with some room.
A room of,
And so what you want is you want something that's mutually beneficial for both parties and that both parties are going to feel good and agree on. So I think you should always aim high. That quote that's like, know your worth and then add tax.
Add tax, yes.
I think you should always aim high, throw in a milkshake, and give them room to negotiate you down if they have to.
Right.
And sometimes you might get the milkshake.
And
like,
you might,
get the milkshake,
exactly.
But you don't know if you're going to get it unless you ask for it.
And that's the strategy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ladies, you heard it, at that milkshake. So now let's think about you facing a board of executives. They're trying to implement one of their branches, you know, let's say in a country, we're from the Caribbean, in a Caribbean country, and what would you say to them in terms of creating a safe space for people to evolve, particularly women? You know, what would you say to that board of executives? Let's say it's an American company coming with their value set and they're trying to invest in something, let's say in St. Martin, and we want to know how can we raise awareness to create a safe space, a safe professional space for women.
Yeah.
You know,
I think there's I do a lot of business coaching with companies, and that's something that you see often.
Okay.
Not just creating a safe place for women, but creating a safe place for minorities. Creating a safe place for your older employees and your younger employees. Like they are dealing with implicit age bias at both ends of the spectrum.
Right.
So I think that it's important to, first and foremost, a lot of your employees will be talking to you, and I think it's important for you to actually listen and actually comprehend what it is that they need. I don't think anybody goes to work, I don't think anybody gets hired for a job and then is, you know, and thinks like, I can't wait to do such a horrible job at this company. I think everybody wants to succeed, and I think as an executive, I think you have the responsibility to give your team the tools to set them up for success. And so when you have people, whether they're women or whether it's a millennial or an older person that feels
whatever
some kind
group
of way about the culture or the or whatever the dynamic is, and you will have toxic environments within a company, just like you have toxic environments in any type of culture. And so one, be aware of the fact that that is possible. And so even if it's your own company, you know, there's a lot, you think of it as your baby and you think of it as the greatest thing ever. Be aware that those kinds of environments and scenarios will create themselves, even if you don't purposely do it, or even if that wasn't your intention. And when your employees or anybody from your team is coming to you and asking you for help or telling you about a specific scenario, understand that it's not them complaining, it's them looking for a solution that is going to help set them up for success. And so listening to your employees and then showing that the input that they give you is valuable by taking action on it. I think that is absolutely, like, that's immeasurable. That's absolutely immeasurable. And then it gives your team a space to be comfortable. And when you have employees that are comfortable, they'll stay longer and they're happier. And they're much happier to do great work. And
it benefits everyone.
It benefits everybody
across the board. Well, I want to talk about, you know, the role of social media today in pushing the change of narrative, you know, against these stereotypes that they put on us women. So we're still all about women empowerment. So how does social media impact today's narrative on what a professional woman is in terms of, you know, career growth and negotiating, like you said, spearheading her career, maybe not wanting kids, maybe not wanting to be married, et cetera, compared to the more traditional media outlets?
I would say that, I mean, I love social media. I think that just has led such an entire revolution in terms of social change and cultural change. And I think you see it, I think it's most evident with the generations after our generation. So not millennials, but Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Alpha, yeah.
So Gen Alpha is like the children that are being born today.
now, yeah.
So it's like the children of millennials.
Yeah.
And so these are kids that they don't know the world without the internet. They don't know the world without social media.
That's all they know.
Like just the beginning, the oldest members of Generation Alpha were born around the time that Instagram was launched.
Wow.
They're playing with Snapchat filters, which are augmented reality, as a toy, right? And so their scope of what the internet is, what it's capable of, and their expectation of technology is going to be very different from ours. Like we think of augmented reality as like, this is so cool, you know.
Right.
We think of self-driving cars as like, this is such an innovation. And I don't even think they're going to have driver's licenses, these kids. Like
they probably won't need it. You're right.
And a lot of them, they're not even being taught cursive, for example, in schools. They're being taught coding, you know, as a foreign language, for example. And so I think it's just a different, social media has definitely changed the game.
Yes.
It's definitely changed the narrative. But I think with everything, I think you have to play devil's advocate of what it's doing at a mass scale. I think it's done a lot in terms of expanding the scope of what it means to be a professional, especially in the world of women. I think there was a lot of businesses and a lot of opportunities and a lot of needs that were not being met by women because, well, a lot of needs that were not being met because the people that would normally form these kinds of products or whatever weren't even aware that women had these issues or that women had these needs or that they wanted this thing. So I think social media has definitely broadened the scope in terms of opportunities of what it means to be a professional.
Right.